Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my May wrap-up. The first book that I read in May is a poetry collection, and that is The Girl Aquarium by Jen Campbell. This is doing the rounds of Booktube at the moment because Jen Campbell is one of our own. She was a writer before she became a booktuber, and I can't remember how many books she has out now, but this is her first poetry collection. Firstly, I'll say when I went into this book, we had invited Jen to come and lead a workshop at our writers group back in February. So I will admit that when I was reading this book, I was looking at it with what she talked about in mind, thinking more about the way she had written these poems, why she'd chosen to put line breaks in certain places. And for me, I was trying my best to unravel the poems as much as I could. What I like about Jen's poetry and about poetry in general is often how what we could deem as being a more simple style of language is actually telling us a lot. And I got that within this collection, no more than when I was reading the poem Small Infinities, which reads like this list. And I'd say that it probably takes on the whole if poem thing because it is a bit of an if poem itself, and each line begins with this if that kind of lends itself to the rhythm of the poem. And even though it was going through this list of almost what if type situations, to me it had this deeper meaning that could almost be about maybe like a first love or something, you know. It felt very innocent by being what I'd originally thought was simple. As it gathered rhythm, as it gathered pace, this one poem, for me, which has ended up just sticking in my mind a bit, also did this thing that I enjoy in poetry with sounds. So you've got a tiny bit of assonance there, and really, when it comes to sounds, assonance for me is just like one of the pinnacles, because just enjoy that connection between the sounds. So you've got soul spitting if splitting had decided to shorten itself. And I feel as though this poem can almost be the tongue twister. Whilst it does seem simple, whilst it is discussing almost childlike imagery at first with fireflies and mothers and all of this, towards the end it expands and it becomes more universal and more about the cosmos, and then brings it back in on itself. And it's, for what I deemed a simple poem at first, to see it expand outwards before contracting again, I really enjoyed it for just that one poem. Whilst I have only talked about one of the poems and talked about its simplicity, widening and all of that fun stuff, I did actually very much enjoy this collection. Sometimes there are poems where when you were trying to unpick them, that was the problem. What you had to do was read it and then go back, which I think is kind of the thing with all poems. But I'm promising myself that I am going to figure out how to discuss poetry better. But I think that these poems help to give you an idea of the types of topics that Jen's interested in and who she is as a poet and a writer. And also, you know, the cover's not too shabby really, is it? Next, I read Dear Boy by Emily Berry, which is another poetry collection, and another poetry collection that led me to think, what am I doing with my life? Why can't I write poetry like this? These poems are all encompassing, which I don't think is a bad thing. And indeed, it gives us an idea of who the poet is, which is what you really want from a debut poetry collection. There is one poem in here that it just seems like a list of fears. And I quite like a list poem because, in a similar fashion to the poem I talked about from Jen's collection, this has pace and rhythm then. That's one of the vital things for me in poetry. Once again, I had that terrible thing of having to separate the poet from the narrator, which I think is something quite a few readers struggle with unless they're poets themselves. And it was just because there were some repetitive bits where certain poems harkened back to other poems in the collection. I was like, was this an actual biographical poem, or is Emily Berry trying to craft a narrative within her poems in order to discuss a certain theme or metaphor? and I don't quite know the answer to that yet. Then I read a poetry pamphlet, Marc the Poet by Rawlins. What I will say about these poems is that they work best when they're heard, because they are written in a similar fashion to be read like slam poetry. For me, I enjoy the poems because of the fact that I've heard them. What I would recommend is if you can find any videos of him reading his poetry, then do that before going out and getting the pamphlet, because I think you'll get more from the pamphlet in doing that. Marc does talk about very large themes within his poetry, to do with the working class, to do with power, to do with society. There are some comedic elements to his poems. Yeah, I definitely recommend him as a poet. Next, I have My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologises by Fredrik Backman. I will send you to the reading vlog that I recently posted. Next, we have Death and the Penguin that I also discussed in the reading vlog. You'll also find The Perseverance by Raymond Antrobus in that video, as well as Spring by Ali Smith and Dead Man's Bells by Jackie Spry, a book that I have misplaced. Another Phantom book for May. Towards the end of my reading vlog, I talked about the fact that I was stuck over what book I should read next, but I ended up going back to Fool's Quest by Robin Hobb. I finished this a fortnight ago and it is still lingering in my mind. This is the second book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, and so I can't go into much detail without spoiling the entire series. This book was probably Robin Hobb at her most fantastic. I don't even know how she did it. I thought it was starting off slow, which was my problem at first. And then you hit the page 200 mark, and there's this revelation which you've been waiting to be revealed. And the final 550 pages are action-packed, they're full of pace, they're full of more revelations and just more awesomeness. And I was listening to it and reading it because, you know, sometimes I was going out, but I kind of became a bit hooked on this book, and the final 500 pages were done in a day for me because, Lord, this was just immense. It was fantastic. It was all of the synonyms. It's really what you want from epic fantasy. And all I could think whilst I was reading it was, I cannot believe that she's doing this. That it's, you know, it finally feels like the culmination of the 15 books are upon us. I'm waiting to read the final book in the series, Assassin's Fate, because I want to buddy read that with Lindsay, because I absolutely refuse to go into that book alone. I read 4 chapters and I was like, nope, I need someone to go along with me for this ride. Next, I read Police by Jo Nesbo. I wanted to finish the series this month and get this and Thirst out of the way, but I couldn't bear this one. Usually, I can read these books in about a day, 2 days. They're really fast-paced, really fast reads. This one, I just couldn't cope with it. It feels like the writer is just going through the motions with his writing now, and you can kind of guess the format of the books. And whilst he does try and change it up a little bit within this one by making you believe that Harry Hole may be dead, it literally says there that it's the new Harry Hole thriller. I'm not going to give up with the series because now I'm that far in and I wanted to get them all done this year. But I'm trying to separate the artist from the art now, because there are a lot of really horrible, derogatory things said in these books. There's terrible shit happening to women. There's stuff said about gay people, and, you know, racism was really present in the first books. And I separated that because I was like, okay, this is just the character. These are the characters. You're meant to be thinking that these are villainous people. But how many books am I in now? This might be the 8th one that I have read, and I'm growing the tiniest bit sick and tired of the same sort of thing being gone over. And I know in most crime series we have a will they, won't they relationship going on. With this one, I was just like, I don't care anymore. It's been 8 books. Just kill them off if you're going to do it, because I don't care. So I'm going to read The Thirst. I'm going to read The Bat. I'm going to read Cockroaches. I might read the new book when it comes out in July. But then I'll be done. And I don't know. Maybe The Thirst is going to be fantastic. But look, I just don't understand what he's doing in his books anymore, because they just seem to get him more weird and out there. And whilst I was here for it 2 months ago, I'm not really feeling the same way now. Then I read my own book, Indisputably Doris. I wrote this. It came out 2 years ago, and I ended up rereading it because I'm currently working on a novella set after this book before going into writing the fourth and final book. I just wanted to remember the characters again, and I thought this book was a lot slower paced than I remember, so when I was reading it, I was like, oh, we got through this pretty quickly. And I know how long this book took me to write. It took me an entire year. Like, you know, it was February to February, this one. I'm trying to speed up on my writing time here because I have a lot of books to write and get out and unleash upon you all. If you would like to purchase a copy of Indisputably Doris or the first book, Our Doris, then I always leave links in the description. The next book I borrowed from the library and returned it yesterday, and that is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. This is her third book. They don't follow on from each other, but I just felt like saying that. This follows the finest female detective of her generation, Bridie Devine, as she is sent across London in search of a missing girl who has some sort of mysticism about her. You know quite early on that she's been kidnapped, and knowing the sort of Victorian era and the title, you worry about what's going to happen to this poor girl. Is she going to become sort of specimen, be sent off to some sort of circus or freak show? That was the part that terrified me the most. Also in this book, there is an element of the ghost, in that Bridie finds herself haunted by a boxer named Ruby, and I'm going to start with a story. I returned this book to the library yesterday after reading and really enjoying it. I finished it over 2 days. They put it straight onto the new releases shelf, and then one of the librarians was asked what she felt about it, and she said, no, I hate it, 1 star, it's too dark, it's too grim. And then I realised I probably watched too much Addams Family as a child, because I actually found this book hilarious. Not gonna lie, I understand there are really dark parts of this book, and you really got to see into the twisted, murky depths of this Victorian London. But I felt that lent itself to this sensationalist tone that we're putting over this book. And I felt like I was getting maybe like the 5th book in a crime series, and we were just getting the story that kind of also told us Bridie Devine's origin story as well as this crime. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, thought it was fantastic, thought it was written extremely well. It really evoked that idea of the Victorian novel for me, and the Victorian setting, and the character names were on point for me. But also, whilst I was reading it, I thought this would be a great book to read in autumn or towards Christmas. I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe the darkness of the story, because, you know, they're talking about rain and flooding and all of that stuff, and there's a magical realism element that I quite liked because it reminded me of the books of Joanne Harris's that I've previously enjoyed. I'm just sad that I don't own Jess Kidd's books, because I have enjoyed both of the ones that I've read now. I only have Himself left to read, and I have been holding off reading that one because I feel like once I've done that, then where else am I going to go? She's writing the perfect books for me, and so I don't know whether that means that I have some sort of twisted imagination. I mean, I know I do, but yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Finally, I read The Space Adventures of Kirk, Sandblaster, Space Adventurer by Ollie Jacobs. I got this book on the recommendation of Dane over at Dane Reads, which I believe was also part of Todd and Dane's indie read-along. No way am I singing their jingle. I bought this book because I'd heard that it was reminiscent of Douglas Adams. I also got it because I thought it might remind me of Sardine in Outer Space, a comic book series by Johan Svart. So, I won't lie, I was disappointed by this book. Dane had mentioned there were formatting issues with it. I know it's an indie book, so I'm not mad at it, I'm just disappointed, if that makes sense, because I feel as though I went into it expecting more. And I know that later on in the series, it said that the books do improve. So I think I'm just going to have to read on and wait for that. But this felt like a prelude to something bigger, whilst also feeling like it hadn't gone anywhere at all. The entire story ends up being a flashback to when Kirk Sandblaster and his sidekick and partner Zla first met, and one of their first adventures together. there was a lot of telling going on, which I understood for the type of story that was being told, and I saw the humour that was here, but I wanted to spend more time getting to know the characters, and I don't know whether that would have been possible. So it's left questions in my head, because I don't know whether that would have been possible for the story that Ollie Jacobs is trying to tell. And the reason I say that is because we're being told this book from a computer's point of view, a computer that has a lot of personality, by the way, and then it's being interrupted by Kirk Sandblaster as well. So all I can say is that I could really see the writer's love of this genre in his prose, and I appreciated that. And I'm definitely going to be going on and reading the future books in the series, because it was compelling and intriguing enough for me to want to do that. It also had this quirkiness that I really, really enjoy reading about. And them's the books. If you have read any of these books and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.